to retain strong trade and financial relations with both Britain and the European Union. This after Britain voted on Thursday to leave the EU. The National Treasury and the South African Reserve Bank said they have been in discussions with financial institutions on the possible implications for the South African economy. President Jacob Zuma has said that government will advise the South African public about unfolding developments where necessary around the outcome of the Brexit referendum. And for an analysis of the Brexit exit from the European Union, we're now joined on the line by Professor Gilbert Kadiangala, Head of International Relations at Wits University. Prof, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us on News Today.
Good afternoon.
Prof, look, world markets in a free fall as UK votes for the EU's exit. I mean, the rand dove 8%. The world was not prepared for such a result, were they?
No, they were not prepared for it because the assumption has always been that Britain belongs to Europe and that Britain is stronger in Europe. And they also are not prepared because the younger generations in Europe, in Britain, actually favor the EU. So they thought probably they'll go to the polls and get the numbers in. But apparently, the majority of the people who voted actually don't want to be part of Europe. So it's a big shock to the global system because Britain is a major power. But it's also a bad story on Europe because European integration has been touted as one of the best stories of the last century, where countries work together to resolve their problems. And also regionalism in Europe has always been a good story because other countries have learned from Europe on how to build integration. But I think the story that is emerging now is that maybe was Europe going too fast? They have done very good things, but the British are a bit worried about the pace of integration in Europe, particularly when you have Brussels now making laws, when they feel like they are not in charge of their country anymore. So this is the crisis now that the world didn't want to see.
Look, Prof, British Prime Minister David Cameron also made an exit from 21 Downing Street. Do you think this had anything to do with the vote? I mean, we saw people like German Chancellor Angela Merkel actually vying for Britain to stay in the EU.
You know, if the big event like that happens in British politics, the Prime Minister often has no choice. Whether you lose an election or you lose a referendum, the right thing for Cameron to do was actually to say, I'm not going to be part of the equation anymore. And part of the problem also is that staying on means he has to negotiate British exit over the 2-year period. And I don't think he's the right person to do it. He mentioned that, in fact, somebody else should be doing the negotiation for British withdrawal finally. So I think that was the correct decision.
Look, let's talk about this, Prof. What does this result mean then for the UK, Europe, Africa, and the rest of the world?
I think in the short term, the English have to renegotiate their relationship with Europe, and that's going to take about 2 years, maybe longer. I think the treaty says that it has to be 2 years. The implication is that I think the Europeans are going to be a bit hard on the British, and so it's going to be a very difficult kind of negotiation because. Having been a member of the Union and now you quitting through a referendum, the Europeans are going to come up with very difficult terms for British exit in the long run.
Prof, a very quick one. I mean, Brexit campaigner Boris Johnson was booed outside his home in London. Now, whoever takes over running of the government will administer a divided nation. But what will their first task be to reform Britain outside the EU?
They have a problem with Scotland. I mean, Scotland is now talking about they are more European than the English. And the Scottish had the referendum 2 years ago and they lost. Now they voted overwhelmingly to remain within Europe. So that's something to watch in the immediate future because if Scotland leaves, then what happens? Northern Ireland may actually leave. They also voted to be part of Europe. So we may end up with a simple England down the road in the next few years.
Prof, look, I think everybody wants to know. I mean, it was easier for the UK to come out of the EU, but is there any chance of them reapplying for admission at some stage?
No, it's very difficult. I think Cameron made a statement two days ago. He said this decision will be reversible, and I think he's correct. Renegotiating re-entry into Europe is going to be very difficult because, as I said, Europe is not really pleased that the UK is treating it like a union that is not serious. So it will be very difficult. They need to renegotiate. They need to negotiate their exit first before even we begin to contemplate whether they can ever come back, and that's going to be very difficult.
Prof, thank you so much for that. That is Professor Gilbert Kadiangala, Head of International Relations at Wits University.